News Channel 5 network. This is Urban Outlook. This program sponsored by Connie London, a certified agent at the Insurance Exchange.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. You may say he's a guru of all things impacting and empowering African-American young men and boys. He keeps tabs on everything from the lack of black boys tapped for gifted programs to reasons behind the stats of young men in jail versus college to the ways our young teenagers can be self-sufficient and succeed despite the societal ills, surroundings, and stereotypes that they may have to deal with. Dr. Gilman Whiting is an associate professor of African American and Diaspora Studies. He serves as the director of the Scholar Identity Institute, and he's chair of the P.1 Professional Achievement Gap Institute. So many hats over there at Vanderbilt University, Dr. Whiting, but we know your work well because you've been here and talked about it before. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for thinking that my work is worthy of being on the show. Well,
as a mom of a young African American man, I certainly want to make sure that we're doing what we can do for our young men and our young people, period,
yes,
right? And I think that's kind of where you come from, your point of view and why you've been doing this research for so long. So let's tap into that first. Let's talk just a little bit about, why the strong focus through the years on young African American men, young boys.
I think it's proximity, first off, being it's me. I also have multiple siblings, like 10. So I had 7 brothers and 3 sisters. And growing up with that single parent kind of existence, I lived through that. Lived through the issues around welfare and low-income housing, as well as in and out of incarceration with siblings. And so it became something that you lived through. I think later on in life, as I got to the point where academics became my eventual job or life trade now, I reached back to some of those things that pushed some of my own brothers off the path, if you will, or kept me on the path or put me on the path. Either way, I'm not sure. But as I got into an adulthood, I realized, and this is post-military, after college, I realized that thing about if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem, really is true. And that at some point in life, we can no longer say it's up to somebody else to do, and it's up to me to do. So I have the resources being at Vanderbilt University and doing this as a life. I would do this if I was at Vanderbilt or not, because I was doing it before I came to Vanderbilt. I was doing it at Martin University, I was doing it at Purdue University, I was doing it at Hamilton College, I was doing it before I even got involved in higher education, period. Because I think role modeling and sponsoring young boys and girls, Black and Latino, Native students, are what adults should be doing. And that means from parenting, early childhood, all the way up through, even through college and universities.
You say it's not always about the problem, but the solutions that go along with it. But what are some of the key core problems that still exist when it comes to our young people, in your opinion?
In my opinion, and the research shows that it starts almost in the womb, because poor prenatal, all of those things, early children having children way too young and not being able to provide for them, the early health benefits, going into school late or not being prepared to read, those type things there early on begin the gaps in achievement and those things there. On the other end, we can talk about the structural racism that is there, that even if you have comparable stats going through and you went to the best schools and you graduated top of your class, going into the world of work, how you still could make less in your earnings than other folks. So my personal experience and the data bear out that the understanding of how to approach schools and how to prepare teachers to teach kids in schools is very, very important. So that's what I'm trying to get across to a lot of teachers and parents. I think it's a web. We can't, when we start looking at things as one individual in the individual silos, that's where we get kind of disconnected. There's no way that if business and industry tied directly into technical programs, and they have students who come out can actually do the job that they're planning to do, that colleges and universities should have less than, you know, half of their graduates who graduate get a job. So you have to go to graduate school these days.
Yeah.
And if you're an African American, a Latino, Latinx, Native student, you've got to look for a master's degree.
Yep. Basic.
That's
bottom line.
That's the thing. So, and athletics is not always going to be there for those very few who make it in athletics.
The interesting thing, I think, is that you sort of have picked apart the different pieces of the solution. So when we had you on the show not quite a year ago, probably, you were talking about the lack of African American boys in particular who were selected for gifted programs and why that was. Talk just a little bit about that study, that research, those findings, and where you are now with that work.
Right. So we're always trying to gain access to individual school data, and oftentimes as researchers we can get what we call the NELS reports or the OCR data or the NAEP data, and those tend to be 2-3 years behind, and that's when they report them, but they were gathered over the previous few years, so we're always behind the actual numbers.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. But that doesn't stop us from saying, okay, we can look at the trends and see what's happening. And what we're seeing in some cities, we're seeing actually graduations drop. You know, the SHOT Foundation comes out with a report every year, and they show the individual gaps amongst African American, European American boys, and Latino boys around the country, and where those gaps are. I was just up in Minnesota just recently talking with gifted programs, and we're seeing the very same thing from Miami to California to Minnesota to Baltimore across the country, where we will have students who are not selected for programming because we don't think they're ready for those things. AP, honors, IB, any one of those programs that a student can accelerate into. And a lot of the young men that I talk to, and that's the difference between collecting all the data and having the qualitative versus quantitative data. When I talk to the young men, the guys at Vanderbilt University, for example, who have been successful, how did you get where you are? Because that's the real answer to the question. How did you get where you are? And when I talk to some of these young men, oftentimes they tell me it was a coach. It was never really the teacher that motivated them or selected them. It was somebody else who said, I think this person has gifts or talents. Because when you're actually suggesting that 3 to 4 times as many white kids for gifted programming than you do African Americans, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
And we see deficits a lot quicker, or teachers see deficits a lot quicker. And I think that, again, that goes back to what I said earlier, the teacher training. You know, you can literally go through your whole program from your freshman year in college to a PhD program and never be required is the key word, to take a class in multicultural, cultural competency, women and gender studies, any of those things that you can actually become a teacher without having any of those courses required. Now, there's a problem there because when you go into the public school system, our school system can be up to as much as 70 to 80% Black and Latino.
Yeah.
You know, but when you have some schools that have those same kind of numbers, and then you throw an IB program right in the middle of the school, then you look inside that program and then you'll see it's 80 or 90% white and Asian. So there's that same kind of disparity that's there. So I think there's a few things. One is recognizing the students for their gifts and talents, and they come in a lot of ways. Instead of seeing a kid who has a lot of verve or energy and moving around as a problem or behavioral disciplinary issue, maybe that child is actually bored.
It needs more to do.
More to do. Or you have the same 2 children who are doing the same actions, this person gets suspended or expelled. And we're looking at now, some new data just came out just 2 days ago that's showing that kids with disabilities are 4 times as likely to be suspended, kids of color,
wow,
are 4 times as likely to be suspended or expelled than European American children, right? The same disabilities, all things equal, you're suspending these kids 4 times as much, quadruple. That's something significant. So what's happening? This behavior issues, we're seeing them, same behaviors, but we're treating them differently, a disparate impact.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk more about how you get that mindset to change, because you say part of it is training teachers. I know you've got some new work out that talks about the importance of a counselor's role in schools. So let's have more of that conversation when we come back after this break. We'll be back after this. Stay with us.